because it is a celestial event. You're honoring literally the new year. Like, it's the shortest day of the year. The following day, the days will begin to grow. And just imagine what that felt like for our people, especially in the colder areas. It was just such a relief, I would imagine, to know that longer days are coming, that, warmth will return. Springtime is still a ways away, but it's coming eventually. So I think that's part of the reason, because we were so in tune and so connected with the land. I think that's why these celestial events, it was a no-brainer that those were the times that were going to be celebrated. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Well for Culture podcast. Today I'm going to talk about the holidays. So the season is approaching, Christmas, New Year's, and what is supposed to be a celebratory time often turns into a time of stress for people. It turns into a time where we really sacrifice our health, with all the parties and the consumerism and the stress of all those things. It can just lead to a recipe for disaster. You've all probably read the articles about how there seems to be just as many people that go through extreme depression, anxiety, during this kind of season, where in reality, it should be a time of rest and rejuvenation for us. And I think that I've experienced in my lifetime a lot of different feelings and emotions and circumstances regarding the holidays. But at this stage, we have managed in my family to develop a pretty balanced approach to how we, get through this season in a good way. And so if you're interested in hearing more about how we do the winter holidays, specifically our winter solstice celebration, listen to this episode. And I just want to say up front, you may have noticed in recent episodes, I'm like out of breath, and it sounds like I've just run a marathon right before I sit down to record. I'm well into my third trimester of pregnancy. My belly is huge, and this baby weighs about like 4 or 5 pounds at this stage. And it's just like pushing everything into my abdomen, and I'm just constantly short of breath. So the first thing I want to tell you about is kind of a tradition that Thosh, my husband, and I have started and have maintained over the past 7 or so years, ever since we've had our daughter together. And it is our tradition of celebrating the winter solstice. So this year, the solstice falls on December 21st. It is the shortest day of the year, and it is technically the start of the new year. The solstices and the equinoxes and all of these celestial cosmic events are something that people from many indigenous nations have always looked to as our primary markers of new year or of progress or of celebration throughout the year. So this is nothing new by any means, but I think the way that we have figured out to do it as a little intertribal family is kind of unique and has been fun for us to figure out together. So the reason that we kind of put some intention and thought into creating our own version of a winter solstice celebration is because, like I said, we are an intertribal family. I'm from the Northern Plains. I'm Chippewa on my mom's side. I'm Lakota on my dad's side. Thosh is Osage on his mom's side and Haudenosaunee, and he's also O'odham on his dad's side. And Thosh and my kids are from Salt River here, which is where we live. And so with that really diverse intertribal lineage, even within our own little, immediate family, there's not one way of celebrating the solstice or of honoring the solstice. It's kind of one of those things where there's aspects of our different cultures that we want to incorporate to honor it in our own way. And so this is what we do. On that day of the solstice, we try to wake up early, and the first thing is we start preparing our food. In fact, a lot of times we'll start preparing the food a couple of days before or the night before, and we really have it planned out. And the main thing with our food is that we eat a big feast of all indigenous foods. As we know, there's a huge movement around Native country the tribal food sovereignty movement, in which many of us are reclaiming our traditional food ways. And not only that, not only to honor that and to contribute to that, but Indigenous foods are delicious. And honestly, there's so many incredible dishes that you can make if you are going to have like an all Indigenous foods feast. And so we just love to get creative. And every year it's always a little bit different, but we cook a bunch of Indigenous foods to share with our extended family. So yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of times it'll be us doing the majority of the cooking, but we are for the day of the celebration, it's a whole family event where we invite lots of family and friends, and whoever can make it can come. And people usually contribute and make it like potluck style, and they bring whatever Indigenous foods they have cooked or gathered as well. The second aspect of our celebration is we wear our regalia. We just enjoy dressing up. We like to look nice. We like to kind of have a reason to wear our skirts, our shirts, our jewelry, whatever it may be. And I think it's also, in any situation where you're coming dressed in your regalia, like it's a way of honoring the moment too. You're like, I'm showing up as my best self. I'm giving life to all of these beautiful pieces that people have made for me, or that I've made for myself, or that I've collected over the years. And so there's always meaning behind it when you wear your regalia. And so we're really intentional about that on the day of our solstice celebration. So it's obviously not a requirement by any means. Like, we're not telling our family members, hey, you have to dress like so such and such. But I think we just make it known, like, hey, if you want to dress up, wear your regalia, like, that's what we're doing. And if people want to do it too, I think it's kind of a nice way of honoring the day. So sometimes a lot of the cooking will be done at our house, like I said, the day before or in the mornings. And then we will all gather outside for the actual celebration or for the actual ceremony. We're lucky that we live in Arizona, where it's nice and warm, even in December. And so it's very easy for us to have an outdoor gathering. If you're from where I'm originally from, you're probably not going to be having an outdoor dinner on the winter solstice. But if it's warm enough, gather outdoors. If not, just make it an indoor thing. And maybe you can still cook some of your food outdoors or whatever, or have like a prayer that happens outside, and then you come back in to eat. But you want to try to spend at least a little bit of time outside, I think, because it is a celestial event. You're honoring literally the new year. Like, it's the shortest day of the year. The following day, the days will begin to grow. And just imagine what that felt like for our people, especially in the colder areas. It was just such a relief, I would imagine, to know that longer days are coming, that, warmth will return. The springtime is still a ways away, but it's coming eventually. And so I think that's part of the reason, because we were so in tune and so connected with the land. I think that's why these celestial events, it was a no-brainer that those were the times that were going to be celebrated. And so we can't forget about those things. I mean, this is our real New Year's. This is our real holidays. And it's fun to honor that. So anyway, we meet outdoors. For us, we go to my father-in-law's house on the res. He has a nice 10-acre property there where they have an outdoor tables and a fire for cooking, and also another fire area just for, having a nice, like, little warm place to sit. And we try to fix it up nice. It's always like a little bit rustic, but it looks nice. So like, instead of going to Walmart and getting like a plastic tablecloth, I'll go maybe to the fabric store and get a nice, like, kind of old school jingle dress looking, like, floral, few yards of fabric to lay as the tablecloth or the table runner, things like that, where you just get creative and you want to kind of buy things, or if you're going to buy things, that it can be reused or repurposed in a different way. Even as far as utensils and plates and stuff, we try to be more mindful about being sustainable. So like, bring dishes from home that can be brought back home and washed, as opposed to like buying everything paper and plastic and creating a big heap of garbage. So, honoring those values of sustainability, I think, is something important to keep in mind on every holiday, but especially something like the solstice. So the food is a big component. Being outside on the land is a big component. Being with family is huge. And then the fourth thing is, of course, prayer. So for us as spiritual people, like, we all come from our own traditions. I was raised primarily with my Lakota prayer and way of life. My father-in-law and Thosh will invite me to say a prayer in my language, and I like to do that. And it's just a way, I think, for all of us to be inclusive of one another's background. And Thosh and his dad and brothers, usually after we eat, they'll sing a lot of songs. But of course, before we eat, they will, say prayers of, blessings for the food, blessings for the family. We just really take our time with our reciting of prayers on that day. And we kind of go around, and anybody who wants to speak or share a song gets a chance to do it. A lot of times we'll have friends there that come from different tribes, different nations, and we just want to make it an opportunity where people can share and speak and say what they're grateful for, or offer a prayer for those who are present, or for maybe their family and their homelands that they're missing. So it's just a nice opportunity for prayer. And then the other thing with prayer too is, like, we do tobacco ties. And if you know what that is, then you know, but usually we'll have like a whole table set out in addition to the food table. We'll have a table where people can be making, medicine ties with not just tobacco, but some of our other medicines as well, our shugoi, our sage, sweetgrass, different things. And then we'll have a basket there where when people finish their medicine tie, they'll put it in the basket. Obviously that's not something that we sit and all watch each other do. It's just like there, it's laid out by the field where we grow food. And so whenever you, at any stage in the day, or, usually we start the celebration around noon and it goes all the way through into the evening. But at any point, people can go over there and make a tobacco tie and add it to our little basket, usually at the end of the night or early the next morning. Thosh and I will string all those together. And then the next day, he will go either by himself or he'll invite a friend, and they'll go hike to the top of Red Mountain and they'll bring those tobacco ties up there. So that's our way of like carrying those prayers that everybody contributed. And they, Red Mountain is their sacred mountain here in Salt River. And it's a very challenging hike. And obviously there's prayer in all of that, getting up early the next morning with the sun, honoring that day following the solstice, observing, the sunrise, and putting for that physical exertion, that hike of carrying those prayers up there and tying them to a tree. That's an important aspect as well. So I would typically go up there and do that with him as well, but usually I'll ask him to do it because our kids are not quite old enough to do that hike yet. They're really tiny and it's a really challenging hike. So one day we'll all go up and do that hike together as a family. But for now, Thosh does it for us. Yeah, and then like I said, so after we feast and we eat, we tend to all, sit around the fire, and Thosh and his brothers will have his brother and his dad, they'll have their gourds and they'll sing, a series of the autumn songs. And it's just a really nice time for everybody to get together as family and to honor the real holiday, like the real New Year. And that's how we do our intertribal winter solstice celebration. So maybe that inspires some of you who also have intertribal family and lineage. But it's been a really, really fun, really nice tradition for us. And I will say that sometimes, we are competing with the glitz and the commercialism and the marketing of Christmas. Our kids come home, and do they talk about winter solstice? Not necessarily. They talk about Santa, they talk about the elves, and we don't sit there and teach them that stuff, but God, they're just exposed to it. And it's kind of frustrating on our behalf because a lot of it comes from their school or just from their friends and movies they see or whatever. And, those are not our traditions. And in fact, our families and our communities have obviously experienced so much hardship and this legacy of exploitation that comes from Christianity and from the church. And so it's not something that we've always been super gung-ho about. So sometimes we feel like we're having to kind of compete with that energy of that. But at the end of the day, it's not something that worries me too much, because what I've noticed is that on that day of the solstice, our kids are so happy. They love the food. They love getting together with family. They love being outside, even though it's kind of a lot of planning and, any kind of family gathering takes work, but it's like fulfilling. And our kids are they love to be out there just running around, playing on their pile of dirt that they always play on, even though they're in their nice, pretty little ribbon skirts. They get to see their cousins, they get to see their grandparents and their aunties and uncles. And to be honest with you, they don't even realize it, but like they enjoy the solstice holiday more than they enjoy Christmas morning, because they're not like overstimulated and overwhelmed and all that stuff that tends to happen with the opening of gifts. So they love it. And I think as they grow older, I think they'll come to look forward to it and appreciate even more that we've always done this solstice celebration inclusive of them. And I'm excited to see how they continue the tradition as they get older too. And so with that, I think let's also talk about the other holidays. Christmas specifically is obviously, like I said, not something that we ever, Thosh and I, we come from families that kind of did both. I guess we both have our traditional upbringings, but we also have families that have celebrated Christmas to different varying degrees. And I think when I was in my 20s was really my era. Like before I had kids, I was like, I'm not continuing that tradition. I'm not going to do Christmas anymore. But like I said, my kids have been exposed to it, and so they want to do it. And so I've kind of become a little bit less of a Scrooge, and I'm like, okay, fine. I guess we can just do this Santa thing for them while they're kids. They have their cultural upbringings that they're always going to be rooted and grounded in. And so at the end of the day, what I've realized is I can let my ego go a little bit. It's not something that's necessarily, it's like as long as we are consistent and intentional with keeping them rooted and grounded in their culture the entire rest of the year, this whole Christmas thing is not necessarily, it's just whatever. It's just a commercial holiday. And I've explained it to Aloe, our older daughter. She's like, where does it come from? What is it? And she understands when I tell her it's a tradition that comes from a different religion that we're not a part of, but we can celebrate and respect other people's culture and traditions. And she just loves the whole Santa thing, and she's just so innocent and little, and I just want to give her that fun. I think the way that we keep it not stressful is a few different things. One is we are limited with gifts. And I think we've made the mistake before giving them, like everybody does, too many gifts on their birthday or on Christmas. And that has never worked out, because if you watch little kids and they're opening their presents, they turn almost the opposite of excited and happy. Once they get about 5-6 gifts in, they're just like something starts to change. And then it's just like the energy of all the new stuff. It's just overstimulating. And they're not even like happy at a certain point. So don't feel like you have to get your kids 100 gifts. It's really not necessarily necessary. In fact, I think the more you get them, it might even be detrimental. So just try to, like, if you're getting your kids Christmas gifts, just a few things that they're really, really going to like. And whatever you create as the norm is going to be the norm for them. So, it's just what they'll come to expect, and it's not going to feel like too much or too little. It's just going to be normal for them. That way it doesn't become a huge budget strain. It doesn't become a huge time commitment to go out and shop and think about and, wrap too many gifts and all that stuff. At the end of the day, obviously it can be really wasteful. Like every year, even as minimal as we are with it, we create a big pile of trash of like wrapping. And I just think about the environmental impact of that, and I don't want to go too far with it. So I recommend just being a little bit more limited with gifts. The other thing is you can always like make gifts for each other. Anything handmade is always like loved and appreciated. Have those conversations with your spouse, your siblings, your parents as well. I think, you can all get to a place where just check in with people and make sure that others know that they don't have to be stressing out about getting you something, and be honest with people if you're stressing out about getting them something. It's amazing like the progress that you can make, that just coming from like honest communication on these things. And so never allow the commercialism of that holiday to be a point of stress for you. And then the same goes for like the foods. That's another aspect where people, have a lot of anxiety and feel a big setback with their health around the holidays. It's, a very common trope that we talk about, just all of the sweets and sugary holiday foods. Like I shared with the Winter Solstice explanation, is you don't have to focus on those like American foods. You can focus on your indigenous foods. You can eat things that are both delicious and healthy at the same time. Some examples of foods that we eat around the holidays, I talked about indigenous foods from our various cultures and regions, but like we do a lot of things with corn, beans, and squash, whether that's salads or soups or stews. We do a lot of things with like bison meat or steaks or wild game that my husband has hunted over the course of the year. We do chilies. We do like wild rice dishes. So not like white people Minnesota wild rice soup where you put heavy cream into everything, but like a beautiful wild rice stir fry where you've got dried cranberries and chopped up vegetables and onion, and you kind of stir fry it all together. I always make squash pies, which is a lot like a pumpkin pie, but I'll do like a gluten-free crust. I'll make it like probably a little less sweet than what maybe some people are used to, but still very delicious. I love making squash pies, different kinds of breads, with our traditional grains. So there's like so many different kinds of healthy, nourishing, delicious indigenous foods and baked goods that can be made, and experiment with those and allow the holidays to be like sort of your time to enjoy that. Yeah, so as long as I say you reel in the commercialism over Christmas, you keep the pressure low. You don't have to have every single bells and whistles and decorations. I think that's the bottom line, is we just put too much pressure on ourselves and pressure on each other to make these holidays like perfect or picture perfect. In reality, you and the kids are going to be happier when it's just more low key, and you focus less on that commercial aspect, but more on like the family, these are days where you kind of keep the phones away and you just really, visit with each other and take a lot of naps and sleep and, rest up and honor that winter hibernating season and the seasonal change that comes with that, and of course, because, we're people who believe in sobriety and being alcohol free. If you can keep that stuff out of the holiday season, that's another point of keeping it fun, stress free, drama free. I think all of those things have been so normalized in American culture. And as Indigenous people, we can lead the way in showing what a healthier, more wholesome kind of holiday looks like, one where we're really honoring the true traditions of this land. So that's what the holidays look like for us. And I hope that more families can continue to find that balance and find a way where it becomes a happy time once again. So thank you all for listening and enjoy the holidays.